For better or worse, the interactive nature of video games and the fact that they try to tell your story as much as the writers means they often aren't confined to a single official ending. That said, you can usually tell when you've achieved a so-called bad ending, either on purpose by being an asshole and making evil choices while you're playing, or by failing an integral part of the story and dooming characters and sometimes the entire world in the process. However, while sometimes these finales are a punishment, they can occasionally outshine the proper endings the writers decide are official, giving players a more satisfying finale that they just wish was real. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 video games whose best endings you never saw. Number 8, Secret Brainwashing, Far Cry 5. The canon ending of Far Cry 5 is a complete shambles, throwing you a last-minute choice to either give up on your crusade and leave Joseph Seed to his own devices, or actually take the murderer down. If you finish your objective, then the world just explodes. Bringing Seed in triggers a nuclear holocaust for some reason. It's actually never confirmed whether it was his doing or not, implying that he actually might have been right the whole time. Visually, it is a stunning ending, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't make a lick of sense, and muddies the themes the rest of the narrative was seemingly building up. However, if you decide to walk away and escape with your squad, you'll be treated as something equally downbeat, but it's at least something that the game sets up prior to it happening. Whilst driving away, a song comes on the radio, the very same song which brainwashed you earlier and made you kill your own allies. Your eyes fixate on the passengers and the screen ominously cuts to black. Yes, it's similarly daft, but it links far better to what came before. Number 7, Nico Takes Revenge, Grand Theft Auto 4. Even though it's been completely overshadowed by its world-conquering sequel, Grand Theft Auto 4's story of Nico Bellic and his bowling-loving cousin Roman marked a step up in storytelling for Rockstar. The developers also flirted with divergent story branches here as well, allowing players to achieve different endings depending on how they navigated the criminal underworld. If you did everything right, you could cut a deal come the game's end and attempt to shake off the heat you acquired, going to Roman's wedding and enjoying a small moment of respite. You're then betrayed though, and a bullet primed for Nico ends up taking out his cousin instead. That's a pretty good ending, but you can opt to avoid the deal and instead hunt down Nico's enemies, taking the violent route and getting his girlfriend Kate killed instead in the process. Though both endings do get somebody murdered, it's the latter which is more emotionally affecting and suits the violent tendencies Nico succumbed to so many times before. Number 6, Last Man Standing, Resident Evil. When Resident Evil came out back in 1996, nobody was writing home about its story. Sure, it was great to revel in the cheesy one-liners and the Jill sandwiches, but the narrative infamously undermined much of the horror present in the actual gameplay. That campiness made its way into most of the endings as well, capping the game off with the heroes flying away from an explosion after shooting the main boss with a goddamn rocket launcher. While they were in line with the rest of the narrative, they were surprisingly upbeat considering how horrific the experience had been up until then, and it rang a little bit false. However, the sole survivor ending remedies this somewhat. The basic story beats are the same, but instead of everyone getting out and living happily ever after, it's instead only your specific character who escapes, with the ending lingering on their battered body. Number 5, The Beast Unleashed, Infamous 2. Infamous 1 and 2 weren't really the most complex games when it came to moral choices, but the two distinctive good and bad endings the developers came up with were often as enjoyable as each other. The second title took that one step further though, and its bad ending was way more satisfying overall. It came down to 2 choices: kill all conduits in order for humanity to live through an apocalyptic event, or transform the humans into conduits themselves so they could survive in the new world. Though it's darker than the alternative, the latter option left the world in a far more interesting, open-ended state. It was so good in fact that it was actually going to be official canon. When the developers came together and hashed out the story for the next entry in the series, this was what they were originally building on, until trophy data revealed that the majority of players actually chose the good ending, indicating that they should probably honour that instead. Number 4, Killer at Large, The Suffering. An overlooked masterpiece of the PS2 generation, the suffering story about a convict on death row who suddenly finds himself battling creatures birthed from the literal evil of the prisoners, made for a superb psychological action game. In it, main character Talk has been sentenced to death for brutally killing his 2 children and ex-wife, a crime which he claims he didn't commit. The good ending clarifies that he actually wasn't responsible for the deaths, but instead his family were killed by hitmen, something which makes sense but feels a little bit like a cop-out. While there is something in the idea of a good man being taken to the island and then being corrupted, the fact that he eventually shakes this off and continues to be something of a hero felt at odds with the tone. The bad ending, however, which reveals that he did indeed kill his family and couldn't resist the temptations of the island, fit more satisfyingly with a game as grim as this. Number 3. Destroy all humans. Prey. The ending of Prey is a bit of a sticking point for fans, as the epilogue reveals that everything you had accomplished over the course of the narrative was merely a simulation of an event which eventually led to the end of the Earth. It turns out that you were never playing as Morgan Yu at all, but an alien creature put into the consciousness of the scientist and thrown into the same world-ending scenario the real Yu was involved in order to analyze the decisions it/Yu made. The plan is to see if the aliens themselves are capable of learning empathy and other human traits, in the hopes of creating a creature able to push back against the scourge currently destroying the planet. Like everything in the game though, you essentially get to decide whether or not this conditioning works, either joining the cause or killing everyone in sight and dooming the human race. It's the latter option which is the most satisfying though, as while it sentences the planet to death, there's also the implication that it was the humans' own fault for accidentally creating an even deadlier enemy. Number 2. Welcome to Dubai, Spec Ops The Line. You don't need me to tell you that Spec Ops The Line has one of the best stories in all of gaming, but while its original ending is great already, its alternate evil climax perhaps makes main character Walker's story even more tragic. Throughout the entire narrative, you realize that the soldier has slowly been losing his mind, sparked primarily after killing a whole host of civilians with white phosphorus, with the villain Conrad being a mere figment of his imagination. In the end, Walker comes to terms with his own psychosis and calls to be extracted from Dubai. However, when he's greeted by the patrol, he can either surrender his weapon and go home, or attempt to gun them down and give in to his villainous side. Gunning them down is, of course, the bad decision, but it's the most thematically rich, showing Walker sign off with the line, "Gentlemen, welcome to Dubai," the exact words Conrad greeted him with at the very beginning. Number 1. Father James whacks Lincoln, Mafia 3. Like with its beginning, Mafia 3 ends on a very strong note. After hunting down the men responsible for destroying his family and shooting him in the goddamn head, Lincoln Clares built his own crime empire, with the epilogue giving the player final say over how he's going to operate the syndicate going forward. If you don't want to share the power, you can opt to take out your sub-bosses and run everything yourself, making Lincoln a bona fide celebrity in the process. However, while you might think you've taken out all the loose ends, there's one man still around to bring you to justice: Father James. He can't live with himself letting you go down the path of self-destruction and actually places a bomb in your car to assassinate you. Father James has been a voice of reason all the way through the title, and Lincoln indulges far too much in his revenge even if you try to steer him into the light. The character doesn't really get close to his story in the good ending, but this explosive murder is exactly what his prior interactions with Lincoln were all seemingly leading up to. So that's our list. I don't know if you guys think these alternate endings were better than the ones we actually got down in the comments below. And while you're there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, you've been watching WhatCulture, and I'll see you soon. Bye.